You know, for these unanswered questions videos, I usually like to kind of do something a little bit different for the intros, go the extra mile. And it's got me into some precarious situations, like I ended up in a jigsaw trap one time, and Ghostface stalked me. That was fun. But I figured if we're talking about the Blair Witch, that I better play it safe and just go with the old green screen and be comfortable in the comfort of my own home. Because, you know, there's no way you're getting me out into the middle of the woods. So, it's just not. Oh. Damn. Well, at least it's not the middle of the night. Oh, come on. Question number 1. Is Mary Brown the witch? Early in the movie, the crew interviews a woman named Mary Brown. Townsfolk called her crazy, and they head up to her trailer to interview her, and she's a gaunt, odd-looking woman who tells them a story about when she was a young child. She had an encounter with a hair-covered woman, and later in the car, Heather says that she claimed she was a ballerina, a historian, and a scientist, and it's clear that she's off her rocker. But is she? Or is it something more? Is it possible that she's the witch herself? There's a theory that that's the case, since she seemed interested in telling the witch's story, and theory is that she's simply interested in the notoriety, considering that it would be unlikely for the all-powerful version of the witch to just kinda show up like this or live in the town in the first place. What if it's something more? What if there's no witch at all, and she's after the fame and the notoriety of the story? It's very clear from what she tells Heather that she has a rather lofty opinion of herself, so perhaps this is how it all played out. She hears about the students making a film about the witch and tell her where they're going. She weaves a tale of the witch, giving them places to look into and background to promote the legend, then simply heads out to the woods to antagonize them, stalk them, and then murder them. Later, when their footage is found, the interview with her will be seen. The tapes prove her right, and also prove she's not the town's crazy woman and would force the town to perceive her in a different way. She knows where they're going. She told them the key points to hit up, then headed up there to fake a haunting and eventually kill them. She clearly has been arranging things out there. Check out the stick figures, and then look at the gate to her trailer. They're constructed the same way. Later, when they find the rocks, Heather recalls a Bible passage that Mary told her about a pile of rocks.
It was Esau, but it was something about a pile of rocks.
And it would appear that she's probably speaking about Genesis 31:52, which says this pile of rocks and this rock set on end will remind us of our agreement. I will never go past this pile to hurt you, and you must never come to my side of them to hurt me. It's a warning to go no further, which, I mean, you know, they didn't listen to. Plus, the Blair Witch Project books denote that Mary contacted the sheriff to tell him that she saw Josh at her front door, screaming and missing teeth. This occurred 2 months after they went missing, well before the footage was found. Again, if she did the deed, this could have been her way to fast-track the police to turn up the juice in the search. Now, I myself don't really think this is possible due to the amount of seemingly supernatural things that later occurred, like the river and the house, which I'll get to a bit later, but I think that there is the possibility that the witch was using Mary Brown as a tool, much like she did Rustin Parr. After all, she is wearing a fully covering coat during the interview. They better to cover a body of hair. Again, I'm not super keen on this element either, since I'm more inclined to go with another theory that, again, I'll discuss later. But I think that the witch encounter has certainly had an impact on her, and I think that if she had any involvement at all, it was most likely constructing the stick figures out in the woods. Question number 2. Did Josh and Mike kill Heather? So I guess this is the most notorious of the theories about the original film, and that's the idea that Josh and Mike killed Heather and they had planned it all along. Here's some of the evidence. Heather doesn't know Mike. Josh recruited him. Josh suggests a ritualistic action on the slate with bleeding on it. Even though they blame Heather for getting them lost, they're often seen leading the way. and they're the ones that find the rocks. Heather makes a comment about the lost map, saying,
You guys weren't lying to me about the map, were you? Because this just seems like you guys are having just a little bit too much fun for my taste.
Did they let their intentions slip there? Mike lost the map on purpose for a really implausible reason. Mike leads Heather directly into the house. Mike is unharmed by the witch, and Heather is killed by something unseen. So, the theory is that the pair are part of a greater Blair Witch cult that exists, looking to spread the legend of the deity further. They have assistance at times from other cult members, which is who you are hearing outside their tents at nights, and they want the film to show the world that the witch exists and is powerful, and are using it to create fear. This adds a new layer to the film, as it seems as if the boys are getting really angry with Heather extremely quickly and unnecessarily, and continue that anger even after it's revealed that Mike threw away the map. The Blair Witch cult does exist in the lore of the film, and there was apparently a book entitled The Blair Witch Cult from the 1800s that was mentioned on the official website back in the day. So the cult does exist, and on that same website they had a journal of Heather's that states that she doesn't believe that the boys sleep through the night, and that it's odd that some of the most strange things seem to happen while she's asleep, hinting that the fellows are setting up this spooky stuff as soon as Heather goes to bed.
So does that hold water?
Are the boys culters setting up a murder? Did they kill her and then head up to Canada, or just die in the woods of starvation since they no longer had the map to get out? There's no concrete here, but my belief is no. So here's the thing, the whole cult aspect of Josh and Mike just doesn't make sense to me, and that's for one key reason. The three were film students. They went to the same film school, and that school was Montgomery College in Maryland. The school is about 32 miles away from Burkittsville, not terribly far away, but not exactly right next door either. The documentary was a school project that Heather came up with. It was her concept. She chose to make that film about the Blair Witch and approached Josh to help her film it, since they had worked together before, and since he knew Mike, he was brought on to do sound. To be clear, and an important thing to mention, is that she was not friends with Josh. She had just worked with him on projects before, so the odds that she would come up with this idea and then just coincidentally happen to ask one of the cult members to help her out on it, and then needs someone to run sound and doesn't have someone available, so that the one cult member can tack on another cult member who just so happens to go to the same school and also be a film student.
Yeah, I'm not buying that.
That's like having the director of a stab movie just so happen to be the guy who sets all the events that the film is based on. Levels of coincidence. No, the whole Josh and Mike are cult members involves way too many things to happen just so to fall into place, and isn't remotely plausible. But what about them not being cult members and just psycho killers?
Again, not buying it.
So there's two options here too. The first is that they killed her and then ran off to Canada, but why would they need to fake all the Blair Witch stuff to do that? If they wanted to kill someone and then run off, why even bother with the documentary? It's an extremely elaborate plan for no reason at all. If their plan was to disappear off the grid and take off, just do that. I know you might be saying, but if they just killed her and ran away, they'd be suspects and people would be looking for them. Well, considering that they weren't seen killed at the end of the film, they'd still be suspects. And guess what? Everyone was still looking for them. In fact, the movie thing brought more attention to them being missing, so that whole thing would be counterproductive. But what about the other option? What if they planned to go back to civilization, spin their tale of a crazed witch in possession, but instead starved out in the woods because, whoops, they no longer had a map to get out? Josh even says when Mike admits to losing it,
Okay.
This is not why I brought you out here, man.
Okay.
To that, I say nay, because nay doesn't get enough use anymore unless you're a horse, because, hey, you can't use Mike losing the map as evidence that they were planning something, and also evidence that it was Mike doing something unplanned. And if they did end up lost in the woods and died, there were massive search parties that didn't find anything at all. No bodies, nothing. Now, I know that those are big woods and all, so the bodies could go undiscovered, but they detailed huge search efforts to locate them, so it would seem unlikely that the boys would be somewhere so remote that they couldn't be found. And come on, they had this big master plan to do all this and every single thing fell in place for them, but it all went wrong because one of them randomly decides to kick a map into the creek, so they're master planners and complete dolts at the same time? All in all, it's a really interesting theory, but I just can't get my head around any of the suggestive motives here. It just doesn't hold up. Question number 3. Did a possessed Josh kill Mike and Heather? So if you eliminate Josh as a human-based killer, and you embrace the notion that supernatural things are definitely occurring, then you have to wonder what happened to Josh. He vanishes one night, but then later on there's a bundle that contains parts of his shirt, blood, what is that, his tongue, and some hair. But then at night, Heather and Mike hear him screaming out for them, and they follow the sounds to the now materialized Rustin Parr house. There, obviously, they're attacked, but where's Josh? Is he, like Rustin before him, taken over by the will of the witch and forced to kill his friends? I actually think this one's pretty likely, since we know from the stories of the past that the witch doesn't directly kill her prey and instead uses her abilities to manipulate others to do it for her. Having her directly pop in and murder Josh doesn't really align with her MO, and earlier, when their stuff was ransacked, it was Josh's that was thrown about and covered with slime. He was potentially being targeted, singled out for possession. He said that he hears noises at night, noises that Heather and Mike didn't hear, as if they were speaking to him in his head. Near the end, Josh is the one that seems the most distraught, his expression getting more and more haggard, getting antagonistic until he straight up disappears. It's entirely possible that the call got too great and he left the camp to get away from the couple, afraid of what he would do, eventually succumbing to the witch's call. The disturbing part of this is the notion that he would end up removing his own teeth to place in that bundle, completely going over the deep end. And if true, then the finale is a reenactment of the Parr killings, with Josh in the house acting in the place of the killer, Rustin, and Heather and Josh taking on the roles of the children, with one of them forced to stand in a corner while the other is killed. Question number 4.
Did Rustin Parr... What was that? Did Rustin Parr kill them in the past?
So maybe it wasn't Josh though. Perhaps he actually wasn't the killer. What if it was Parr himself? But wait, you ask, wasn't he killed? Didn't he get hanged or hung or hung or whatever the right thing is back there in 1941? Well, yes, but consider one thing. His house is there, and according to side materials, that was burnt down back in 1941 as well. And it's not like it was partially burnt, it was burnt like Kruger burnt. And later when they find the tapes that the movie supposedly is, it's in the foundations of the destroyed house. How'd they get there anyway? So looking at the 2016 film gives us a clue that we need there in the concept that time doesn't work the same way in the woods. The witch is distorting time and space, changing the fabric of reality to suit her needs. It's why they can't find their car. Their car doesn't exist yet, because potentially the trio has been shifted back to the 40s when Parr was still active and killing. He then does what the Parr-B do and kills them, following his pattern. Then he leaves the tape there where they remain until they're found in the present day. So that's the theory, but does it hold up?
Well, not to me, and here's why.
First of all, the simple matter of the tapes, saying that they've been there since the 40s just doesn't work. Film and videotape degrades over time, especially if left in the elements. There would be very little chance that there would be a usable image on either. But wait! You could just imply that it time traveled. I mean, it went back in time. Who's to say that it can't go forward too? That's all good. I can get behind that, but then there's the element of Mike in the corner. If he were in the house and encountered Rustin Parr, I think he'd more likely put up a fight than anything else. So for him to just give up and be standing in the corner waiting for Parr, a normal man under coercion of the witch, to kill? He wouldn't do that unless he was also coerced. And let's face it, if we're now discussing time travel and supernatural coercion, I mean, do we really need all of that? It just sounds like a lot of steps to make a theory happen. The concept of the house being out of time makes more sense, with the coercion element of manipulating both Josh and Mike as opposed to taking control of Mike only, and then adding a real-life time-displaced murderer. But then we come down to the evidence. When they caught Parr, it's not like they found any bodies of the trio, which I guess is possible due to there being a real lack of investigating skills in that era, but Parr didn't really seem to hide his actions, so why would he go to such lengths to cover these ones up? It's just way too overly elaborate of a theory for such a simple, streamlined film. The time-displaced house is simple enough. Let's just go with that. I mean, besides, I don't want to hurt my head by getting into time loop stuff.
I hate thinking about time loop stuff. I hate thinking about time loop stuff.
Question number 5.
Is Ellie Kedward the witch?
The Blair Witch has appeared in a variety of ways and forms over the centuries, with sightings from the early 1800s describing it as barely human, whereas Rustin Parr saw it as an old woman. Mary Brown saw that naked old furry lady. When Heather saw something out in the woods, she didn't seem to know what she was looking at. If it were an old woman, she probably would have said, "Who is that?" Probably not, "What is that?" But the speculation is that these are all forms of Ellie Kedward, an Irish woman who was banished from the town of Blair and then accused of killing several children and killed back in 1785, left in the woods to die, with tales of having rocks tied to her arms and legs to stretch out her limbs. Her story is pretty detailed in The Curse of the Blair Witch, a mockumentary released around the same time as the first film, and it's generally assumed that Kedward is the witch, and them killing her is the start of her haunting within the woods. But here's the thing. According to the Blair Witch Dossier, an official book companion to the first film that filled in a lot of the blanks of the history and folklore, the woods were troubled well before Ellie. There's a passage about the natives in that area discussing the woods as the Black God's realm, and that tribesmen would go missing there long before Ellie was ever around. So, the question is, did Rustin Parr kidnap and kill those kids as a ritualistic throwback to Kedward's MO? Or did Ellie's killing of the children serve as a throwback to the witches? Perhaps Kedward was just a vessel, much like Parr was, or perhaps she never killed those kids at all. The legends tell of disease and pox running through the town at the time, and like the Salem witch trials, it would be easy to tag an innocent woman as a witch and make her at fault. If true, perhaps the force that lived within those woods simply saw a methodology to use here. Perhaps it took on the form and cause of Kedward and just kinda liked it. I think that the most likely scenario here, given the natives' legends from long before Ellie was even on the scene, is that the witch has been there for much longer than the legends imply. And much like Rustin Parr, Ellie Kedward was a very useful tool in getting the result that it desired. And that result is apparently dead kids, which, qualifies it as a pretty evil, unseen thing. Side note, there was a book called The Blair Witch Files Volume 8 that actually states that Ellie isn't Ellie. She's actually a woman named Annabeth Hutchinson, who was horribly pox-scarred and wore a veil to hide her face. She traveled to America on a ship and met Ellie Kedward there and adopted her name, settling in Blair. This changes the lore, not much at all, and other than the character's given name, it serves as the same character. I think it was like a YA novel or something, like
Blair Witch Twilight or something.
Question number 6.
Does the second film happen in the same universe?
So here's the deal with Part 2, Book of Shadows. The beginning of the sequel refers to the first film as just that, a film, which means that in this universe, there never was a Heather, Josh, and Mike. Well, I mean, the actors just used their real names. So I guess that there actually was, but they didn't get killed in the woods. They were just actors in this world. This would seem to insinuate that Book of Shadows is actually in a separate continuity than Blair Witch. But then there was a TV special that ran on the Sci-Fi Channel concurrently called Shadow of the Blair Witch that seemed to try to alter that perception. This faux documentary seems to indicate that the events of the sequel actually happened and were real events, even though the film was told in a narrative style and not found footage. The convention is that the movie, Book of Shadows, is a dramatization of the actual events. So, like all the things that in the movie happened, and this movie is adapting that for the screen. So that could mean a couple of different things. The first option is that the second film's events with characters in the movie on screen are just a reenactment of actual events that occurred in the real world. The first movie was the same thing. Heather, Mike, and Josh were actors portraying actual things that happened, and they recreated the look of the actual tapes that were found. When it came time to do the sequel, they basically did the same thing, except they dropped the found footage and reality aspect of it. Of course, that simply means that the only time that we're seeing the quote real world in which these films are set in is in the accompanying documentaries, or I guess our world. Like, they're saying that these happened in the world we're in, and the actors are playing out real events that happened. But since we know that's not true, that world becomes its own reality. But there's a ton of problems with that. First of all is the notion of taste. I mean, the general idea that the movie was the real thing and was marketed as such was sketchy to begin with. Tons and tons of people thought they were actually watching footage that was legitimately discovered in the woods, and those kids were missing in real life. Forget about how questionable that is to market and mass produce what is essentially people being killed on screen. I don't think that a studio would logistically do that, because the studio head would have to be some sort of monster, and this wasn't released by Miramax. So, but take that a step further. In this universe, what they're saying happened is that some people died under mysterious circumstances, and footage of those circumstances were then found, and then some filmmakers decided to recreate that as closely as possible and then release it as if it were reality, which is probably as ghoulish as just straight up releasing the actual footage. Like, we're not gonna actually show you these people dying, but we're reenacting it as close as possible and then telling you that it is those people dying. How is that any less weird? Plus, the same Shadow of the Witch doc straight up calls the original film a work of fiction. Plus, they have people discussing how odd it is that they're making a movie version of something that happened in real life. They do this without ever mentioning that the original film did this as well. So it would appear as if this scenario isn't possible. The original Blair Witch Project is not a recreation in this world. It is exactly what it is in our world, a fictional film created to appear like the real deal. The other option is that it's just a new reality, and Part 2 is in no way connected to Part 1. Part 2 exists in a reality very similar to our own. In that world, the first movie is just that, a movie. And that movie inspired some people to go on a Blair Witch tour, and then a bunch of people then got killed. Then someone made a narrative film out of it, and that's what Book of Shadows is. So, yeah, that's a lot of layers, and probably way more than you want to think about the second movie. But there you go. Question number 7. What is that thing in the third movie? In the 2016 film simply titled Blair Witch, which I guess can sort of qualify for that whole requel categorization around the finale of the film, we see this thing. What the hell is that? It's a very fleeting glimpse, but it pops up a few times, and the general thought is that this is actually the witch. We're seeing her for the first time. Look at this thing! I mean, it's nightmare fuel, but it's probably a bit disappointing in the long run. I mean, ancient giant evil force that's pretty much all powerful and Lovecraftian, and then she's just kinda Groot with saggy boobs. But here's the thing, that's not the witch. You're not getting a peek at its final form or anything. Simon Barrett, who wrote the film, revealed it himself on Twitter, saying, "You don't see the witch on screen. That's someone else." Notice the phrasing there, someone else, not something. And to me, that leaves two options. One is that it's Ellie Kedward. We know from the backstory given that Ellie's limbs were stretched out and elongated, which surely seems like what happened here. Her arms aren't too short to box with God, if you know what I'm saying. If that's so, and it is Ellie, and Barrett is saying that it's not the witch, then that would confirm what we were talking about earlier, and that Kedward is, in fact, not the witch as well, and was merely a pawn. Now, much later on, or Possibly at the same time, given the timey-wimey nature of the woods, this is the physical form that she's now taken, killing again. But there's another possibility, and that's that it's Heather. We never see her killed in the original film, so it's possible that she was simply taken. It's been 20 years that she's been out there and possibly transformed and warped into the creature that we see here. It would bring more of a narrative closure to involving James, her little brother. Having him go look for her is a fine reason to get characters out there, but on a script level, there's any number of reasons to have people go out there. Having it be her brother was put in there for a purpose, and having the creature at the end brings a sort of wrap up to that entire thread. He goes looking for his sister. He finds her, just not in the way he expected. In the end, the reason he turns around is because he hears her voice, and that's not manipulation, it is her voice. It brings a touch more credence to the fact that he says, "Don't look at it no matter what," and then 5 seconds later just, looks at it. It makes that thing slightly more tolerable that it actually is his sister. Now, as for Lisa turning around 5 seconds after that, yeah, there's no way to smooth that over. Question number 8.
What is up with that light coming through the windows?
This one will probably be pretty quick because it's a fairly simple answer, but it's one of the things that I see brought up the most frequently online, so I figured I would address it. As the film is coming to a close, James and Lisa end up back at the Parr house, much like in the original, and they end up in the attic. While there's this bright light that illuminates the entire room and is accompanied by this loud noise. It only lasts a few seconds, and when James tries to look out at it, he can't see anything but white. After subsiding a few seconds later, when the creature is behind the door, it looks like the light is behind it, and again it flashes through the window. Now, the predominant theory is that it's sunlight. Considering that time is completely erratic in the woods and seemingly controlled by the witch, she's making brief instances of day to night and back again, disorienting the pair in the house. So, we're seeing an extremely rapid passage of time occur. There's only one problem with that, and that's that this doesn't look anything like daylight. The beams of light are coming from a singular direct source. Sunbeams are usually at an angle, not directly across like this. And they don't remain stationary, they waver a bit. So you're saying it's just the sun at a particular time of day that is positioned at a low enough angle to create horizontal beams like this, then it's moving up and down and up again, which I don't know if you know, but the sun doesn't do. Unless the witch is goofing with time like she's scratching a record or something. Plus, as far as I know, sunlight doesn't make this sound. Even more so when the fact that James looks outside and doesn't see anything seems to also indicate that it's more than just the sun. I know that his eyes wouldn't be adjusted to the light, but this doesn't look like that. It looks more that he's peering out directly into the source of the light instead. He'd be likely to see the woods outside all lit up like in the daytime, but instead it's just pure white light. Again, nothing like the daytime. Nope, this is something else, which leads me to the next question. Question number 9.
Is the Blair Witch an alien?
Yeah, there I said it. Yep, call me crazy. Whatever. But you were thinking it when you were at the theater or at home or I don't know, on your phone or whatever you watched this thing on, and you saw these big old beams of light punching through the beams like someone trying to give Walken some communion or something, and you said, aliens. Look at this. If you saw this and didn't say, oh wow, they're going with aliens, then like Tom DeLonge is judging you right now. I know that a lot of people have embraced the daylight theory, but look at this and listen. That sounds like some sort of machinery, and that light sure looks like something directly outside, shining straight in. Combine that with the whole people trapped in an area of sort with no rules of space or time and people vanishing without a trace from the backwoods of rural Virginia, and yeah, it's starting to sound a lot more alien to me. If you think that this is absolutely ludicrous and is only supported by one scene from a sequel that most people don't even care for, need I remind you that in the first one there was an instance where the boys found the stuff covered with a mysterious slimy substance? Well, Simon Barrett himself completely denounced this theory, and I believe the quote was that he wouldn't touch it with a 10-foot tree branch. So, I guess that's out? Where even am I? Question number 8. Again. So what was that damn light? If it's not aliens and it's not sunlight, then what the hell was that? Well, here's 2 options. 1, searchlights. We know that time and space don't make any sense here and that people have searched the woods and didn't find anything. The house is only there to those that the witch wants to see it. This is potentially a search party out there looking for James and the crew, looking in the area that his sister's tapes were previously found. Of course, they're not going to see a house or whatever the witch doesn't want them to see, but perhaps we're getting the tiniest glimpse of their efforts. Or, here's my personal theory, the one that I actually think makes sense to me, and it'll appease those of you that like the idea of the light being daytime coming and going real fast. But what if it's the opposite? We know that it's storming outside. There's lots of thunder and occasional flashes of lightning. Well, if the witch is indeed powerful enough to tamper with time and space, why couldn't this just be lightning? Just slowed down. Explains the flickering effect and why it doesn't seem to be so consistent. If it's striking right outside, then that explains why the source seems so direct, and also why James looks out and can only see white. And the noise, if it's the sound of thunder and the strike slowed down. It's kind of like when someone slowed down that Justin Bieber sound, and surprise, surprise, it actually sounded listenable and completely indistinguishable from the original noise. Question number 10. So what does the Blair Witch even look like? So with all of this, what does the witch look like? Well, like any legend, her appearance seems to vary. I mentioned a few of those earlier. The old woman in black, the hair-covered fur lady, but she's never actually seen in the movies. Heather thinks she sees her in the first one, screaming,
Please. Oh my God, what is that?
but there's no real indication that what she's seeing is even the witch. The second movie doesn't give any traces of the actual witch either, and the third one has something that people assumed was the witch, but as we've already covered, most likely isn't. During the first film, when Heather sees the thing in the distance, it was supposed to be a ghostly figure in white, I guess a woman in white, but it was actually just a crew member dressed up spooky. And by spooky, I mean he was dressed in thermal underwear pulled over his head. I mean, if I just randomly saw a droog just chilling out in the woods, I'd be screaming this too.
Oh my God, what is that?
But here's the thing. I personally like the concept that the Blair Witch isn't really a witch. Like we talked about before, it's more of a presence, a massive unseen force that has lived within the area for centuries at least, corrupting people and sowing chaos. The concept and title of witch emerged through folklore and superstition and the adoption of Ellie Kedward as the sort of embodiment of it instead of being just another pawn. It's just a massive reality and time-altering entity, formless and shapeless, and if we ever saw it, we'd go mad. So it's best to keep it out of sight. You know, like that Revenge of the Nerds remake that's half done and on a shelf somewhere. Just keep that locked away. But I guess if you really want to see a version of it, you just have to ask Todd McFarlane, creator of Spawn and maker of a sadly missed line of action figures called Movie Maniacs. It was a line of hyper-detailed figures of famous horror villains, and in the fourth series in 2001, shortly after the second film's release, he made a Blair Witch figure. But since the character had not been seen in the films, he offered his interpretation of what the character would look like, and then, in an interesting turn, made two different versions for buyers to choose from. The first has since become known as the Dread Witch, and it's a skeletal form with a screaming, toothy mouth and dreadlocks. She's draped in a sort of cloth and comes with a sigh. The second figure, known as the Tree Witch, has basically the same body, but the head is different, instead sporting more of a monstrous look with large tree branches twisting out. Both of these looks are pretty disappointing and probably one of the best examples of things are scarier in your head ever. Okay, so there you have it. If you don't like those answers, I'm so sorry. So sorry. But I hope you enjoyed this video. I know I'm currently lost somewhere in the woods. I hear cars somewhere. I mean, I'm in Los Angeles. It's not like I'm ever far from civilization. So I guess if I just walk in one direction, I'll eventually find something. I don't know. If you know the way out of the woods, please let me know. Send it in the comments down below. Leave me the proper directions and which way out and how I get away from here. And possibly leave me a comment about what that over there is. Okay, I've got to get going. I'm gonna go this way instead as quickly as I can. In the meantime, I would like for you guys to please hit the like button if you enjoyed this video. Please hit the subscribe button if you enjoy this channel and you want to see more content like it, and maybe hit that bell if you want to see some more videos and such. And do that. Please check out the Patreon page at patreon.com/movie timelines. Whoop, and you can go support the channel. These guys over here they help support me. Maybe you can do that too if you want to. In the meantime, maybe I'll see you next week for another great video.